Hi, we just wanted to start by acknowledging the land we are on, the native and the indigenous people of Massachusetts and the Wampanoag tribe.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the International Women's Week 2020 keynote lecture. My name is Fiona Kenny. These are my co-chairs of Women in Design, our student group here. This is Chelsea Kilburn, and this is Vaishnavi Shukla. We're thrilled to be here with you this evening, and we'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our student group this week and our programming for it, and our keynote speaker tonight. So Women in Design, for those of you who don't know, is a student-run organization here at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, committed to advancing gender equity in and through design. Led by women but open to all, WID works to make the design fields more equitable and open in light of the historic underrepresentation of women in recognized leadership roles, as well as design's critical need for diversity, collaboration, care, and recentering marginalized voices. Part of that involves working to increase the visibility of and transform conditions around female-identifying designers and to incorporate their experiences and knowledge into our education here at the GSD. Women in Design organizes around three core objectives: nurturing a supportive community of care on campus, creating opportunities for students' personal and professional development, and public advocacy for systemic change towards gender equity. So International Women's Day, first celebrated in 1911, is now acknowledged globally and belongs collectively to groups around the world as a day recognizing the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. Since 2017, Women in Design has extended this annual event into a week-long opportunity for community, collaboration, and criticality. WID gathers members of the Harvard GSD community and beyond to cultivate new ways of thinking about gender, design, and community. Events during this week take many formats and scales. In the past, we've hosted everything from lectures to walking tours to film screenings. And WID's fourth annual International Women's Week convenes this week, March 2nd to 8th, 2020, at the Harvard Graduate School of Design.
So when considering the theme for this year's International Women's Week, we found ourselves reflecting upon the qualities WID has extended towards us in our past years with the group. I speak personally, but I think we can all agree that Women in Design, WID, has offered us a space of comfort and encouragement, feelings that all too quickly dissipate in the face of deadlines, intense class loads, and the demands that we put upon ourselves. So in 2020, International Women's Week takes the theme of kinship as its focus. We might think of kinship as the connections between people, or to borrow from anthropology, a body of managed social interactions or an extended family. In a sense, we found this quality within WID, but in global moments of social and environmental crisis, leaning into and enacting kinship can become a radical act. We seek to check in with each other, to recognize the contributions of those historically rendered invisible by and in the design disciplines, and to celebrate the connections women have between and for each other. We additionally aim to further push this idea of kinship to encompass a feeling of responsibility to the environment and to other species. Meaningful, thoughtful interactions with the more than human are essential to the sustaining of life and the development of a more equitable world, processes that we believe both are and will be affected by design. It is our hope that this consideration of kinship can facilitate a decentering of the human, a stance we all too often embrace as designers. And now I'd like to thank many people for helping us plan and enact this whole week. This week of celebration would not have been possible without the amazing and generous time and support of so many groups. So we just want to give an enormous thanks to our fellow student groups, including AASU, Medina, Film GSD, and the group at 40K Gallery. We'd also like to thank the folks at the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, the Francis Loeb Library, the Lakshmi Mittal and Family South Asia Institute, the Alumni Council, Career Services, Student Services, and the Office of Public Programs, with a huge shout out to Patrick and Paige for all of their work. And we have a special thanks for Dean Whiting and the Office of the Dean. Thank you also to all of the WID members who have made this possible. A huge shout out to our team leads and members. All of these groups have made our programming possible, and I would just like to take a moment to extend the invitation to those of you who have not had yet the chance to see our programming for the week. Yesterday, we've had the pleasure of hearing Professor Elizabeth Hoover of Brown University speak to the power of food sovereignty and heritage seeds in Native American communities. And tomorrow we will host a breakfast conversation with globally recognized Thai landscape architect Kotchakom Veerakom. among other events happening this week. But tonight, we thank you again for joining us in Piper for our keynote speaker, whom Vaishnavi will now introduce.
Dr. Vandana Shiva is trained as a physicist and completed her Ph.D. from the University of Western Ontario. She subsequently switched to interdisciplinary research in science, technology, and environmental policy at the Indian Institute of Science and the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. In 1982, she founded an independent institute, the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology at the foothill of Himalaya in Dehra Dun, dedicated to addressing the most significant ecological and social issues of our times in close partnership with local communities and social movements. In 1991, she founded Navdanya, a national movement to protect the diversity and integrity of living resources, especially native seeds, and the promotion of organic farming and fair trade. The Time magazine has credited Dr. Shiva as an environmental hero, and Forbes has recognized her as one of the 7 most powerful women in the world. Dr. Shiva has received honorary doctorates from University of Paris, University of Oslo, Connecticut College, University of Guelph. Among her many awards are the Alternative Nobel Prize, Livelihood Award, Order of the Golden Ark, Global 500 Award by the UN, Earth Day International Award, Lennon ONO Grant for Peace by Yoko Ono, Sydney Peace Prize, and the MIDORI Prize for Biodiversity. Personally speaking, I have been fortunate to hear Dr. Shiva deliver a lecture at CEPT University in 2015 while I was still in my final year of undergraduate architecture. Her powerful and poignant work relating to seed freedom, resource extraction, and most interestingly, the interweaving relationship between nature and women as a part of the ecofeminism discourse resonates with projects and issues being taken up here at the GSD and across Harvard. Before we invite Dr. Shiva, we have a little snippet from her upcoming documentary for all of you to watch.
Food is a weapon. They said when you sell real weapons and arms, you control armies. When you control food, you control society. When you control seed, you control life on Earth. It just so happens that throughout history, in every culture, it's women who kept the seed. I'm born in the Himalayan forest, and non-separation from nature was quite clearly a lesson. We had a classroom out in those forests. I chose as a young child to do physics, even though the schools I went to didn't offer it, because for me, physics was about understanding how the world works. So at the end of it, I did a Ph.D. in foundations of quantum theory, and it's quantum theory that taught me how to make connections. Because of my book, I got invited to a biotech meeting where I realized what the industry wanted to do with the seed, which is to take control of the seed through patenting. That's when I started. I took a commitment to start saving seeds, but I also realized it's not enough to talk anymore. Got to do it.
40% of the solution to climate change lies in organic, ecological farming in the hands of small farmers.
Can't wait for governments and corporations to make the shift. People must. A GMO forced on people without a label is a criminal act.
Monsanto is proud to be the industry leader in agricultural innovation.
Monsanto sneaked into the budget law a clause that no court could ever rule against them.
We're committed to helping farmers double yields by 2030.
GMOs haven't produced more. There's only one way: ecological farms, small farms. And yet, we get the propaganda: without GMOs, people will starve. Without chemicals, people will starve. We have enough innovation and technologies to grow more food without killing our farmers. You have to throw the light of disclosure in order to break these secret bonds between manipulated officials, manipulated GMOs, and manipulated science. This is Gandhi, 7 social sins: politics without principles, wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, worship without sacrifice. If I hadn't felt the imperative to come back to India, both to answer the puzzle of the disconnect between big science and big poverty, as well as just the surge to give back. I didn't know how I'd give back, but I had to give back. Old lady from India. Why does she drive you nuts?
Please join me in welcoming Dr. Vandana Shiva for this year's International Women's Week keynote lecture.
Thank you so much to the wonderful young women of the Graduate School of Design for organizing a whole week to celebrate women's power. And most importantly, to celebrate it at a time where the world needs it desperately. We're living through times when life on Earth itself is threatened. I have a new book out called Oneness versus the 1%. A bit of that film shared about my background. And you know, it's an amazing thinking that design isn't just in the obvious field of design. Even science is about design. Because the way you design the world in your mind is the way you relate to it in the real world. And when you design it as dead matter just to be exploited, you will exploit it. When you design it without any understanding of limits, you will violate the planetary limits. When you design it with deep recognition of interconnectedness, you will nurture those relationships. And this basic recognition is what I drew from my learnings in quantum theory, that non-locality, non-separation, interconnectedness, that is the nature of reality. But we have a design in the paradigm of mechanistic thought which didn't evolve, it was imposed. That mechanistic thought is based first on the assumption that we are separate from nature, and nature is constituted of discrete particles separate from each other who can only relate through violence, through force, through action by contact. In the quantum world, there is no separability. My thesis was on non-locality in quantum theory. Everything is interconnected. There are no fixed essentialized qualities that have been built into the way people are looked at, nature is looked at. Potential is the defining quality in the quantum world. The fixed immutable particles that cannot change need force and the kind of force that's now being applied through chemicals, even through the genetic manipulation, where the idea is that a gene is not in relationship with the whole genome and the complexity of living organisms, and it's not in relationship with all the organisms it relates to. A gene is an atom. In fact, the word originally used for genes was atoms of biological determinism, if you look at the history. Quantum theory is based on the psi function, the potential. And because it's about potential, it's also about uncertainty. The mechanical world is based on a false illusion of determinateness, certainty. And in the quantum world, we know we cannot get rid of uncertainty, the uncertainty principle of Heisenberg. To this is linked to the fourth principle: no excluded middle, no duality, no either or. In the quantum world, it's and. In the mechanistic world, you can either be a wave or a particle. In the quantum world, you have potential to be both, and they're complementary. This is Bohr's complementary principle. And what I evolved in my mind in those years of training my mind out of mechanistic thought into quantum thought is the way all indigenous people have thought. All indigenous cultures are based on relationship, on kinship, as being part of the earth. Part of what's happening right now is fires in Australia. And more people are realizing that the Aboriginal people had systems of management based on fires. And they weren't bush people, they were gardeners of 40,000 years. And they could keep living with that same land over thousands and thousands of centuries because they saw themselves as part of the earth. I just read a poem, Mother Earth, by an Aboriginal poet. I belong to this land. It runs through my veins. It's the earth in my bones. It's the feeling I get when I return to my place. It's deep down inside me. It's my Mother Earth space. Whether it's Pachamama as the organizing principle of the Andean cultures, or India with thousands of names, what I love about India is we can always give 100 names. The Ganga has hundreds of names. Diana Ek is here, and she's worked so much on the Ganga. But even the feminine has so many names. Bhumi, Vasundhara, Prithvi. You can choose whichever expression you prefer, because when you realize that the world is one interconnected whole, you also realize that what appears different is actually different expressions of an interconnected reality. That's the ecological principles I learned from my very early days of activism in the 70s, from an amazing movement of women. And I'd like to honor them. I'd like to express my gratitude, because I say I went to the University of Western Ontario to learn the foundations of quantum theory deeply. But I went to the University of Chipko, where women who'd never been to school were my professors, because they lived the forest. They knew more biodiversity than any expert. And long before the international community started to develop the language of ecological functions and services of nature, the slogans of Chipko said, and I remember this so clearly, women came out with lanterns during the day, and the police was there, and the officers were there, and They said, you stupid women, can't you see? The sun is out. You don't need lanterns. And they said, no, it's not for the sun, it's for you. Because you seem to imagine that these forests are timber mines. But these forests are our mothers, and they give us soil, water, and pure air. And then there was a flood in 1978, and the World Bank had to wake up to the fact, yes, the forests had watershed functions. And our government then made a policy responding to the Chipko women to say logging in the high altitudes, commercial logging would stop. But the discussion on air went on. They said, oh, stupid things, how can they think trees have anything to do with air? When the basic photosynthetic reality is that the carbon dioxide we breathe out is what only green plants can convert to oxygen and make it air. Now this is part of the climate work, except that again, instead of saying forests perform this function and are the lungs of the earth, there's now an attempt to trade in the ecological functions. Besides the destruction of the last lungs and the last rivers, it breaks my heart to see what's happening to the Amazon. For some more GM soya, some more meat, and it's not just the biodiversity of the Amazon that's being exterminated. The indigenous cultures are being exterminated, continuing a 500-year legacy of extermination of the local, the indigenous, the diverse. The worldviews of the earth as living herself is now recognized in science. James Lovelock talked about the Gaia hypothesis, that he was a NASA scientist, and he realized that the earth organizes her temperatures. She organizes her climate. And as I say, the disruption of her organizing capacity is the instability that is now leading to temperature increases, untimely rainfall, all that we talk of as climate change. I refer to it as climate chaos. Because climate change means there'll be a linear line of increase in temperature. And there are people who write, the climate skeptics, the climate deniers, who say, oh, that'll be fine because they'll be able to swim in the winter in the Nordic countries. Well, actually, if only they knew the sauna in Finland. They get out of the sauna and jump into the frozen lake anyway. They don't need warm temperature to swim. But we don't have a linear line. We have extreme events, unpredictable, uncertain. We have hailstorm in the peak of summer. We have floods in deserts. And we have warming and melting of the snows and ice of the world. It's happening in the Arctic, it's happening in Antarctic, but it's happening in the third pole, my region, the Himalaya. We did a study and a short film on climate change at the third pole. And it's interesting because working with the communities, they tell you, this glacier was 25 meters thick. It's now 2 feet. And yet, because at the Copenhagen summit, an attempt of denial was made, suddenly the scientists started to talk about, oh, there's no retreat of glaciers. Again, they've come back to the fact that, yes, we might see the disappearance of the Himalayan glaciers, which means that half of humanity, which depends on the waters of the Himalaya for their drinking water and their irrigation, half of humanity will be deprived of water. We haven't even started to imagine the countries dependent on the glacial melt having to live without it. No one has imagined what the disappearance of the perennial Ganga and a conversion into a seasonal stream will mean. for 1/3 of India that is in the Gangetic Basin. But not only are the diverse species interconnected, the beauty of it is they are self-organized. I think one of the problems with the mechanistic paradigm and the mechanistic design in the mind projected onto the world is that it assumes that the only change can be external, and it can only be through violence. But every cell, every microbe, every being is autonomous and autopoietic, self-organized and free, dynamic and evolving, but not isolated in its autonomy and its self-organization. It's interconnected and non-separable. When you shift to self-organization and organization from within, you realize that you can have interconnectedness and autonomy together. A problem with the reductionist worldview. Scientists from Maturana and Varela have identified all living systems as autopoietic, organized from within. Machines, on the other hand, are allopoietic systems, assembled and controlled externally. One of the most dramatic ontological shifts of our time is redefining living organisms, especially seeds, as machines invented by corporations. And this has guided, this illusion of seeds as machines and inventions, and therefore patentable, is what has guided my life since 1987, when I first heard this. I said, this is madness. And yet this madness gets repeated as science, and this madness then becomes international intellectual property law, and this madness is then even tried to be imposed in bilateral talks. Because I woke up to this so early, long before the WTO came, I was able to work with my government. We had different governments then. It was the 80s. We had different parliaments too. I could work with our ambassador in the GATT, and we could change the GATT, which earlier the draft that Monsanto had brought was parties had to patent seeds and living resources. This was changed to parties can exclude from patentability plants and animals. And for seeds, they could create sui generis system. So I went back to India, started to work with our government and parliament. We passed laws. I was invited to, there was no one else talking about it, so they asked me to help draft the laws. We managed to get in our patent law a clause, plants, animals, and seeds are not human inventions. It's a simple recognition of kinship in law. That plants, animals, and seeds are part of our extended family of life. I call it the Earth family. The problem is the word family has become so abused because of patriarchal readings and patriarchal domination. But a family means kinship. And when the whole world is your family, then every tree, every blade of grass, every microbe, the elephant, the big cats, and everyone of diversity in our human cultures, our human colors. I mean, it's very strange because till colonialism, everyone knew they're people of different colors, but it wasn't a problem. It was diversity. And racism was born out of capturing blacks from Africa as slaves and bringing them to work in the cotton fields and in the sugarcane plantations. And that's where racism was born. Exactly the same process that led to the idea that indigenous people weren't fully human. And the same process led to the idea of women being like the earth, inert dead matter, or at best, reproductive machines. I remember, this must be about 25 years ago, I had been invited to a keynote in one of the 5 colleges. And I was looking through the archives to get a sense of how this college came to be. And in the archival material, there are these debates that if women start to study their brains will grow, and therefore their uterus will shrink. That's how mechanical thinking was. And it still is, unfortunately, because mechanistic thought is based on separation, disconnection, and essentialism. And it defines women as purely reproductive machines. It defines people of color as inferior, and it defines indigenous people as not having any human capacity. It defines diversity of humanity into nature, which is now just dead matter, to be conquered, to be owned. This birth of capitalist patriarchy comes out of the 500 years of colonialism, which morphed into the 300 years of fossil fuel-based industrialism. And we're living in the continuity of both. When I was trying to make sense of why is it that women were rising to protect the forest, to protect the rivers, and that's when I wrote my book, Staying Alive, I realized that it wasn't by accident that we think mechanically about the world. We've designed our paradigms to declare war against the earth. Francis Bacon is called the father of modern science. And according to him, the nature of things betrays itself more readily under the vexations of art than in its natural freedom. That violence is what gets the secrets of nature out. He actually he wrote a book called The Masculine Birth of Time, where he has defined knowledge that comes through participation and co-creation and recognizing the life in nature. He defined that as effeminate. And the masculine birth of time was basically a knowledge based on separation. It's out of this thinking that the Royal Society was born. And as the Royal Society says, Bacon promised to create a blessed race of heroes and supermen, and they're still trying to chase that dream. You know, every illusion of superiority comes from that sense of we're a blessed race of heroes. And we were the chosen ones. The Royal Society, inspired by Bacon's philosophy, was clearly seen by its organizers as a masculine project. In 1664, and that period, you know, poor Columbus actually was not coming to this continent. He didn't even know it existed. He was coming to my land. And that's why all indigenous people in all their diversity are called Indians. It's just that the land came in the way, and what he had been given was called a letter patent, and I found this out when I was trying to look for the roots of the patent, word patent. Since when does it exist? It only now relates to invention, but the letter patent was an open letter of declaration, and it was basically a hand-me-down from God to the Pope, to Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand of Spain, to Columbus, who basically said, go conquer. Any land where we don't rule, and take it over on our behalf. And it went on to talk about, it evolved later, a year later, into the papal bull by Pope Alexander, that you have to civilize the barbarians, and if it means exterminating them, exterminate them. Exactly the same kind of letter patent is what brought together 300 merchant adventurers, as it's called, to form the first corporation, the East India Company, that ruled India and ruled this part of the world. The Boston Tea Party was part of that period. gave rise to the idea that if land wasn't occupied through conquest, it was empty. And it did empty out 90% of the indigenous populations of America. So terra nullius as a legal idea led to the design, which led to the violence against indigenous people. And it's interesting that, because I grew up as an innocent physicist, I didn't read the classics till I was mature and had been through life. And, you can't understand how is it that these are called the classics. That the Bacon's idea of science as domination and separation is called science, because it's not knowledge. Knowledge is to know your relationships. How is it that a Locke can say the indigenous people of this land can't have property because they don't improve the land, because their oxen roam free? So freedom for other species was treated as proof of inferiority. An extermination of the bison then became the design. Hobbes, who could not imagine democracy as self-organized communities, writes this classic, which is still the basis of the way states want to run, through centralized control, and are expanding by the day through the new toxic mixture that isn't so new because it was there 100 years ago. The mixture of seeking economic power through tools of fascism. Inspired by Bacon was Robert Boyle. I learned about Boyle's equation. The more you compress a gas, the less volume it takes. But he wasn't that innocent, because we now think of science and religion as opposing categories. But they were one in that period. Robert Boyle was a director of the East India Company, but he was also the governor of the New England Company, the company that ruled this part. And he says, he explicitly declared his intention of ridding the New England Indians, whose land we stand on, of their ridiculous notions about the workings of nature. He attacked the perception of nature as a kind of goddess and argued that the veneration wherewith men are imbued for what they call nature has been a discouraging impediment to the empire of man over inferior creatures of God. This is basically saying there is no earth family, because it has declared other species as inferior species, creatures, and therefore, because the indigenous people take care of other species, they too are an inferior culture. And when he died, he left a will to defend Christian religion against those he considered notorious infidels, namely atheists, pagans, those who believe nature is living and treat her as sacred, and Jews and Muslims. I didn't realize Muslims were already also that long ago part of a problem. So in the 60s and the 70s, the use of, at that time they didn't call it physics, they called it natural philosophy, but natural philosophy and a fundamentalist Christianity became part of the extermination. They became part of one colonizing mission. And this then got accelerated a century ago with the oil, but 2 centuries ago before, with coal. And fossil industrialism is, everyone recognizes, the main driver of climate change. Because what you're basically doing is extracting 600 million years of nature's work to take what she had buried underground and fossilized into coal, into gas, into oil, extract it and run the industrial machine. Way beyond the recycling capacity of the earth. And not only are you pumping so much, the earth's own capacity of recycling the living carbon, recycling the living nitrogen is there. But when you pump out every year 20 million years of her work on fossilization and turning it into dead carbon, you're also simultaneously destroying the capacity of reabsorption. You're destroying the forests, you're destroying the soils, you're destroying the farmers. My work over the last since 84, I started to work on agriculture because of the Punjab violence and the death of thousands of people in the city of Bhopal when a pesticide plant leaked. And Union Carbide, which owned the plant, is now owned by Dow, which is merged with DuPont. And there was a poster, I remember of that time, where it says, Dow has a hand in India's future. And it's a poster that you can look for. And it's a beaker from a lab pouring a red liquid on a farmer with a bullock. We know it had a very bloody hand in India's future. And it is what woke me up to the violence in agriculture. I started to look. I said, what is this design? Where did it come from? Why do we farm in these ways that has to kill thousands? 30,000 were killed in the Punjab violence, 1984. We've been having violence in Delhi right now, and everyone is talking about the violence of 1984, because the violence that began in Punjab then led to the assassination of Indira Gandhi, and out of that, the killings of Sikhs in Delhi. Everyone is talking about 1984 again. I don't know how Orwell picked that year for his book. I realized while doing my work for the United Nations University, for which I was working on a program on conflicts over resources, I said, there's conflicts here. And I think it has to do with resources, and it doesn't have anything to do with religion. I'd like to investigate, and I did. And I wrote a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution that the University of Kentucky Press has published. And I realized that the chemicals we use as progress in science are actually chemicals that were developed first, originally, for Hitler's labs by I.G. Farben, the cartel that is still the one running agriculture. Right now, they've become a cartel again because Bayer has bought Monsanto, Dow and DuPont have merged, and Syngenta has merged with ChemChina, and then there's BASF. You might have been following the cases in this country. BASF and Monsanto have had rulings on the dicamba drift, which is, it's Roundup use led to Roundup resistance. So dicamba was then used for killing the weeds, but it drifts. And a peach farmer got a $235 million ruling recently. But 3 farmers before that got cancer rulings, victories in cancer cases. Last time I talked to lawyers, there were more than 80,000 cases in this country of cancer victims because of the use of Roundup. And here again is evidence that what we do to the earth, what we do to the land, what we do to biodiversity, eventually comes back to us. There is no separation. Even the chemical fertilizers did not come from a science for feeding the world. It came from the explosive factories and ammunition factories of Hitler. And it's basically a process of fixing nitrogen at very high temperature by burning fossil fuels. And for 1 liter of diesel, you need 2 liters of no, for one kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer, you need 2 liters of diesel. And the graph of nitrogen fertilizer continues to grow. But does nitrogen fertilizer help improve the soil? It doesn't. We've just done a study after 20 years of being on our farm, and basically the top soil ecologists of India did the study for us of the continuous changes in soil. If land, they studied 5 years, farmers who had been cultivating through chemical means, including applying nitrogen fertilizer, and farmers who had been doing organic farming in Doon Valley. Organic farming reduced soil organic matter, which is carbon, by 14%. In organic, it went up to 99%. Nitrogen went down 22% in the synthetic nitrogen applied fields, but it went up 100% in fields where we applied nothing outside, but we allowed the soil organisms to make the nitrogen. Earthworms make nitrogen. Bacteria make nitrogen. There are millions and billions of soil organisms that are producing soil fertility. Zinc, down 37% in the chemical soils, up 14% in the organic soils. I had a doctor visit me from Australia. She looked at this data. She said, I now understand why half of the teenagers in Australia who come to me for treatment have depression. She says, I do their brain chemistry, they all have zinc deficiency. And now I understand where it's beginning. It's beginning with industrial farming. Magnesium, 17% down. They're giving kids very strong psychiatric drugs for attention deficit disorder, they call it. Just lack of magnesium. It's increased 14% in the organic soils. So the health of the planet and our health is one health. The health of the planet is both the amazing capacity of the Earth to regulate her climate systems, and we disrupt those regulatory processes. You basically do what the problem of diabetes is. Diabetes is called a metabolic disease. I call climate change the planetary metabolic disease. Pumping too much carbon dioxide, too much nitrogen oxide. Nitrogen fertilizers emit nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more lethal for climate instability. And most of the methane is coming either from animal factory farms. You know, that's why they stink. When you go past a CAFO, you get a stink. Or the huge dumps of garbage, which have become methane factories. The sources of greenhouse gases, I wrote a book called Soil Not Oil, and I'm very happy to leave these books that I've carried for the library at the School of Design. I'd written this book, Soil Not Oil, that rally that they were showing in Copenhagen. This was 2009. And that's when I said, why aren't they looking at the soil? And at that point, my assessment was about 45% of the greenhouse gases come from a system of producing food that's fully based on fossil fuels and chemicals derived from fossil fuels. The petrochemical industry is a fossil fuel industry. The figures now are the production is contributing 11 to 15% of greenhouse gases. Land use change and deforestation, it sounds very tame, but it's basically chopping the Amazon and the rainforests of Indonesia for palm oil. It's 15 to 20%. Processing, transport, packaging, retail is 20%, and at the end of it, you get degraded food that gives you chronic diseases. It's not food anymore. I say you've turned food into anti-food, because food is supposed to nourish you. And then waste itself 2 to 4%. On the other hand, as I shared those figures with you, we have a system. If we co-create with a living earth and get out of this trap that the earth is inert and dead, and we are her conquerors, and we reestablish the recognition that we are part of the earth, and as participants in her processes, we can practice non-violently. And in this non-violence lies the hope for the future. All the data is showing that at the rate at which we have been recycling carbon and nitrogen on our farm, if the whole world farmed through biodiversity, whole world farmed organically, we could actually reverse climate change. And we'd have good food, and we'd have livelihoods, and we'd have peaceful societies. Because what the biodiversity is doing is pulling out that excess carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide from the atmosphere through the plants and putting it back where it belongs in the soil. This is a living earth solution. It's the denial of the life of the earth and her capacities to create, to heal, to recycle that has allowed an illusion of conquest. But a system that's gone crazy is not a system in which you are in charge. I mean, the idea of conquest has given us this world, this new little being that's brought panic to everyone. And then the title of the economy says, and it's going global. We're supposed to stay local. Only the big players were supposed to be global. How can these nasty, pesty viruses go global? It throws the system into disarray because when you discount the life of the other, it could be a microbe, you in fact create a recipe for disorder. No wall will prevent this moving. Walls can prevent people from moving with violence. You know, this morning when I got up, I picked up the Boston Globe, and it had an interesting picture. It's written by two faculty of Harvard from Center for Science and International Affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School. So I guess it's very respectable. It's basically talking about the bedrock of our relationship of the two big democracies is the respect for humanity and human rights and democracy. Well, the picture itself says a lot, but here my heart skipped a beat because the scarves they are wearing have actually been made by Navdanya, the movement I started. Let me tell you the story of how two leaders of violence are wearing non-violent scarves. I didn't give them the gift. But I hope it'll seep some non-violence into them. So I started to save seeds 87 onwards to defend the integrity of the seed, the diversity of the seed, the freedom of the farmers to save and exchange seeds. And initially we just saved seeds of food crops because that's where the biggest assault was. But then suicide started in the cotton area. And basically, in a very, very rapid period, I won't go into too much detail, but 99% of the cotton became BT cotton owned and controlled by Monsanto, who locked Indian companies into licensing arrangements, got the farmers to give up their seeds through something called seed replacement, and there was a monopoly. That's when I started saving cotton seeds. And then we started to work with farmers to do organic cotton. And then I started to work with the Khadi ashrams to spin and weave cotton. Navdanya, which means 9 seeds, and my folder, just by chance I'm carrying this folder, you know, this design was actually taught to me by a tribal person in Tamil Nadu who explained to me I thought I was educated in interconnectedness. I was out on seed-saving trip, and he had 9 crops in his field. And I counted, because, after Punjab, I would count crops. If I saw anything more than a monoculture, I would get very excited. And I saw 9 crops. I said, wow, you're growing 9 crops. And he says, yes, Navdanya. And then he explained to me, people think if you haven't been to Harvard University, you don't know. And here was this tribal in a remote forest giving me this lesson of how the 9 planets in the cosmos, the 9 crops in the field, and the balance in our body is one continuum of balance and harmony. And if he disrupts that balance, he's destroying the health of his family, he's destroying the earth, and even the cosmic balance. So when I wanted to save seeds, I started the seed-saving movement. It got the name Navdanya much later because of the inspiration of a tribal. But the inspiration for me initially was Gandhi, because I said, if we had a cotton empire of cotton that took people from Africa, made them slaves, took the land of the indigenous people, pushed 60 million of my people to famine, death due to famine, I said, what will be the violence of this empire over life? And I took lessons from him of how do you deal with an empire. He pulled out the spinning wheel and said, as long as we make our own cloth, we will be free. In a way, that Boston Tea Party was also a little attempt of some kind. I know it's mutated into another kind of Boston Tea Party, but so I said the spinning wheel of today, I thought very hard, what would it be for the empire of a life? And I focused on the seed. I didn't know anything about what to do with the seed. The design came to me from the spinning wheel. And from there, I started the work. We've created more than 140 community seed banks, including seed banks that have seeds that can tolerate salt and are an amazing response to hurricanes and cyclones as part of climate change. We've been able to build back agriculture along the coastal communities of the Bay of Bengal. Flood-tolerant rices. They're not being invented by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They've been co-evolved over millennia with co-creation between peasants and the earth. There has to be brilliance where one grass can contribute to 200,000 rice varieties. That's what India evolved. Just as much as one wild plant could give you the thousands of corn varieties in Mexico. And even better, the amazing systems of diversity in cultivation. Navdanya for us in Mexico and throughout the Americas, the 3 sisters. You never grow corn alone, you grow it always with squash and beans. And then they are a complete system, nourishing each other. That mutuality is what is sustainability. That mutuality is not just maintaining the health of the earth, it's also maintaining our health. Because we have externalized others so much, we forget that the biodiversity in the soil gives us more nutrition, gives us healthier plants. In industrial societies, foods have lost 60% of their nourishment. You're eating nutritionally empty food. And our work is showing that with biodiversity, with organic, with native seeds, which have far more nourishment, we can actually feed 2 times India's population through conservation. That's the other polarity, that if you conserve, you can't develop. But develop what? Development is a biological, ecological term which basically talks of evolution from within. A seed becomes a plant, that's development. You were a fetus. You are developed. You're a developed fetus. That is development. But if you're bullied and trashed, that's not development. And fossil fuel yardstick has become the measure of development. Years ago, I'm thrown into dealing with the World Bank. Unbelievable. Those were the times where India had no plastic and no pesticides, and we were declared underdeveloped because we weren't using plastics and pesticides. And now India is drowning under plastic waste, and our peasants are dying with pesticide poisoning. We've done an assessment that every year, $1.3 trillion of damage to human beings and nature is taking place because of chemicals in farming. The book is called Wealth Per Acre. Measuring nutrition per acre, we created a health per acre to say what matters really is the nourishment of the food. It isn't the weight of a nutritionally empty toxic commodity. And part of what has surprised me so much in my long journey in agriculture is how we could be taken for a ride by total constructions. The construction of yield, which only measures what leaves the land, not what quality it is, nor what state does it leave the land in, whereas good agriculture is culture of the land and should be the production of nourishing food and regenerating the earth. As our work in Navdanya is showing, that farming has to be an act of gratitude to the earth. Thank you for giving us what you give us. And we give you back a part of what you have blessed us with. And interestingly, our work is showing that the more you give to the earth and in community, the more you have. The extractive logic that came out of conquest is based on the need to take away everything from the last being and the last person. And giving then is treated as a loss. But all ecological teaching teaches us the more soil water, more water you give to this organic matter you give to the soil, the more water you have, the more nutrients you have, the more food you have. But that mechanistic idea that's blocking our ability to make the shift is, at the end of it, centered on an arrogance of a monopoly on creativity, a monopoly on intelligence. The assumption that's been created, whether it be the Descartes or the Bacons or the Boyles, they all work on the assumption that privileged, rich men are the only ones who have a mind. Women don't, nature definitely doesn't, and the other beings are just there to be exploited. Remember in debates I've had with patenting, in the European Parliament, this person who owned this protein pharmaceutical industry, that company's gone. I will write a book one day of how many bad ideas I saw die in my lifetime. And the good ones continue to renew themselves. And he said, he basically had genetically engineered a sheep with human genes in it. And his argument was that in the milk of the sheep, there'd be human proteins. And the mammary gland of the sheep would be the new pharmaceutical factory. And for him, the sheep were furry little factories walking on the hillside. Tracy was the first sheep, but then they had to clone her. And then they made Dolly. Poor Dolly is now in a museum. The idea of the monopoly of destructive power as intelligence is a negation of the creative power of the universe. The creative power of plants. As Michael Madder has said on plants, only in refusing to treat intelligence as an exception in the order of life and the evolutionary process will we gain admission into the uncharted terrain of plant thinking. J.C. Bose, an amazing physicist from my country, did work on plant thinking, on plants as sentient beings. He was among the founders of electromagnetism, but he'd used his electromagnetic experiments to see how plants respond to violence and non-violence, to good music and to yelling. And he could measure the amazing generosity of the world is based on the recognition of the creativity throughout creation. I mean, creation comes from creativity, doesn't it? It's supposed to be. But somehow creation went dead somewhere along the way in this, and it didn't happen overnight. Centuries of construction were taking. But I didn't complete my story on the scarves. Let me come back to it. So, last year I had to give the Gandhi lecture at the Sabarmati ashram, where they're sitting, which is Gandhi's first ashram in Ahmedabad, Vaishnavi city. And while they were showing me the archives, I saw this amazing design of a sari. And it had been hand-spun and hand-woven by Gandhi for his wife, Kasturba. So I asked the ashram, I said, we should reproduce this for Gandhi's 150th anniversary. And they gave us the permission, so with the farmers growing organic cotton, with the Gandhi ashram in Sevagram, we hand-weaving and hand-spinning these scarves. And of course, they asked for some, so we sent them 30. 2 of them are decorated. And I can say, well, let Gandhi bless you. And let there be, with this year of Women's Day, let there be a transition to nonviolent thinking, to nonviolent action, and to a humility that we need so desperately. A humility that will come from these microbes that are putting the fear in us. As one of the amazing geneticists, James Shapiro, has written, he has said bacteria are sentient beings. They possess many cognitive, computational, and evolutionary capacities. Studies show that bacteria utilize sophisticated mechanisms for intercellular communication and even have the ability to commandeer the basic cell biology of higher plants and animals to meet their basic needs. This remarkable series of observation requires us to revise basic ideas about biological information processing and recognize that even the smallest cells are sentient beings. And this becomes more and more important as the destruction of our health and the destruction of the planet's health makes us realize that creativity is the way life organizes itself. And when we mess up, there's one step ahead. So Roundup Ready crops gave us Roundup resistant weeds. That's evolution. Plants evolve. Bt toxic crops gave us super pests that can't be controlled by Bt toxin. And the more we dismantle the biodiversity, there are analyses that are showing how, I've done this for agriculture, but the more you destroy diversity, the easier it is for a pest or a disease to move through a system. And as we destroy the diversity of our forests and our ecosystems, the tiniest of microbes that evolves and mutates can start shifting to unpredictable places, and that mobility is something we didn't imagine, we didn't plan, and we don't recognize. It's that shift that we need, also because today the chronic disease, the communicable diseases are growing, but the chronic diseases which are affecting everyone with industrial foods, they are showing the link between the biodiversity outside, the biodiversity in the soil, and the biodiversity of our gut microbiome. We have a forest within us. Trillions of microbes in our gut. The gut is being called the second brain. We are only 10% human cells. The rest belong to other species. It's time to put away the arrogance that some humans are above other humans, and those other humans are superior to other species. That's anthropocentrism. Let's say a bye-bye to racism, to sexism, to anthropocentrism, and celebrate the earth with the recognition that the earth is alive, women are actually brilliant, and all people have rights. Thank you. Happy Women's Day. And for, long ago when I wrote this book, Staying Alive, some young men would come to me, why are you against us? I said, why am I? I'm not against you. I'm just talking about the feminine principle in all of us. And Gandhi had a daily prayer. He said, Mujhko aur istri mein banao, which is make me more womanly, make me more compassionate, make me more caring about life around me. Thank you. Question? Sure.
I think we have time for some questions. You have just super awesome students around. We request you to kind of just start with the question, not have any comments, please, and just keep it super brief. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joana Varon. I'm Brazilian. I'm sorry that we are now all unfortunately interconnected by having to deal with far-right lunatics such as Bolsonaro, Trump, and Modi. We hope our next interconnectedness goes towards something else. Otherwise, the Amazon will keep burning. But I wanted to ask you about other powerful and monopolistic actors, the big tech companies that we all also feed. Recalling the article that you wrote about top investors of Facebook being the same as Monsanto, as well as Bill Gates' relations to the company, can I have some comments about how do you see the role of big tech companies such as Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft on the climate chaos? And how do you see their narratives, such as Jeff Bezos creating the Earth Fund, Google saying that their maps, AI, and big data will help us save the Amazon? And what do we do considering that much of our social movements are building and are being built using those technologies as well? Thank you.
So, these companies having that much wealth and the individuals having the kind of trillion-dollar wealth is all post-WTO. Because what's called globalization was deregulated commerce. That's what it was. And the first meeting of WTO was deregulating software trade. That's what shot up Microsoft. Big issues right now. I've just been in Calcutta where I launched a new initiative between Navdanya's organic farmers and hawkers, street vendors, because 40% of the street vending was destroyed in the last 2 years by Amazon and Walmart in India. So we have to create tighter circular economies based on solidarity to counter these. I call them the extractive economies. That's what the colonizers did. That's what the fossil fuel economy did. It's an extractive system. But this system, too, is an extractive system, and it is a rent collection system. East India Company came, and the maid made money, said this land is ours. And now you pay us the rent. And you starve to death because we'll take such high rents, it's called Lagan, that you won't be able to feed yourself. Exactly the issue on the seed patenting, which we have resisted, but behind the scene royalties are collected illegally. And in India, in the US, I did a calculation, American farmers are paying $10 billion annually in terms of technology fees and royalty payments on seed. 60% of the seed is in the hands of the 4 giants. It's interesting that suddenly tech has developed its own vocabulary. And it's not that we didn't have technologies before. It's just that we saw them as means, as tools that we use according to our choice. For the first time in human history, technology in the hands of the billionaires becomes the new civilizing mission for humanity. I know this because there was a decision 2016 to make cash illegal in India. It was called demonetization. All the poor people lost their livelihoods. Same. But it was assumed that everyone would use digital. I noticed the vegetable vendors that come to our street still use cash. And the cash economy has bounced back because it is a people's economy. The illusions about the big technology firms is they create. They extract. They don't create anything. Software programmers create the platforms that they use. Even Bill Gates didn't really write his basic program. It was some professor, 2 math professors in Dartmouth College who did the basic program. They have posited themselves as inventors. When basically, we've done a new report, it's because Bill Gates announced a new project called Ag1. All agriculture will be one agriculture controlled by him. Where does he set up the office of Ag1? In Missouri, where Monsanto's headquarters is. But we watch what's going on in India, and we pieced it together. So basically, he's financing a lot of data mining from farmers, which will then be packaged back as big data and sold back to the farmers. But this is exactly what happened in your 2016 elections. Facebook sold data to Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica analyzed the Facebook exchanges on the basis of 4 hates: hate of women, hate of blacks, hate of migrants, hate of Muslims. And the entire election was done on political ads based on those hates. So as the Newsweek said when it did this story, for the first time we have an artificial intelligent president. So when you think of why are the kind of leaders that we have getting created, it's very important to remember that in these 25 years of corporate deregulation of commerce, you basically have a lot of money in the hands of very few people. And they then are the ones investing in all the companies. The companies are not independent companies anymore. They're basically billionaire money managed by the investment funds like BlackRock and Vanguard, etc. They also know that everywhere people are on the streets. Just look at this year. Show me a country where there weren't protests. Chile, Beirut, Hong Kong, everywhere. So how do you deal with the rising demand for a change? We threw out the East India Company in 1857. The Crown took over. They established a policy called divide and rule. And then they started to divide Hindus and Muslims because Hindus and Muslims had stood together to defend their land, their livelihoods, their freedom. It took from 1857 to about 1920 for all kinds of means, census, fake identity, because people in India would say, I'm a Hindu and a Muslim, because they'd go to mosques and they'd go to temples. And when they'd be asked, who are you? They'd say, I'm a gardener, I'm a blacksmith. For them, the religious part was very, very secondary. Their occupation was their main identity, the place where they came from, the community they came from. And this took so long This is what led to our partition. And that partition is still being played out. It's an incomplete project. So divide and rule becomes a necessity for the 1% to continue to hold on to power. And if you notice, everyone, I mean, this is something some of the graduate students should do. What are the economic policies being pushed while people are divided? Because that's really the agenda. And none of them make their own decisions. I watched the coup against Lula. How is it that they are such clones of each other? Because the powers that actually govern have put them in place because they know they'll do the job. And our work now is, that's why this meeting on kinship is so important, your theme is so important. We have to remember we are one humanity. We are part of one earth. And whatever we do, we will not let this basic recognition divide us, either from the earth or from each other. And together we are strong.
It's my reading and my experience that we've misunderstood Gandhi, that we look at him and think about political nonviolence, but he was also talking about economic nonviolence. And khadi cloth was a second income for small farmers. The constructive program was about building up an economic and a social basis. The idea of Swadeshi, which I understand is local production, it was what he called the heart of Satyagraha, Soul Force. And I do a solar Swadeshi. I have a small solar light that's my bike light. And Swadeshi and nonviolent economics were not part of the American civil rights nonviolence, are not part of our vocabulary for nonviolence in the United States. I'm wondering what you can tell us about how we reintegrate those ideas into our systems today.
So, you know, this book, Oneness versus the 1%, my last chapter is precisely on the 3 principles that Gandhi put into practice for not just political nonviolence, but economic system. Because his response really was from an empire that was based on violence. And he wanted to shape economies based on nonviolence because they were going to be the basis of freedom. And it's quite amazing to, when you go to Sevagram, you see everything that you need in human society, he was experimenting with in terms of producing at the local level. So he had 3 key terms. The first was Swaraj, self-rule, but it also means self-organizing. The power to organize yourself individually or community, not in isolation, but in relationship. Swadeshi, off the place, local, and local living economies are an imperative. If we don't move there, we are going to see more and more people on the streets. We're going to see more and more people hungry. Look at the number of people who are hungry in this country. I was in California, and the students were saying half of the students in the universities are hungry. And so they were working out systems to get food to the students who can't feed themselves because the costs of the cafeterias are too high. And then, of course, Satyagraha, which for Gandhi was the force of truth. And Gandhi, interestingly, practiced this first. In 1906, when this divide and rule and apartheid was being put in place, apartheid hadn't been named apartheid then. It was only named as a system in 1948. But in 1906, the British wanted to turn Indians in South Africa into second-class citizens. So they wrote an Indian Act. And Indians had to register on race, And they had to carry their identities all the time. And a lot of what's happening right now in India around this identity issue is related to that history of the Satyagraha. But most importantly, any police officer could enter your house at any time and demand your papers. You couldn't trade locally, you couldn't practice professions. And so the people said, we would rather die than obey these laws. And Gandhi led that satyagraha. It's his first satyagraha. And I've written about it in a blog. It's available on the Navdanya.org website. I've called it, in the present context, growing gardens of diversity, weaving garlands of love, because our national anthem, of which we only sing the first para, in the third para, says people came from around the world and became part of our culture. And we wove garlands of love. This refusal to cooperate with unjust law is what Gandhi called satyagraha, as a duty of truth. He was inspired by Thoreau, who refused to pay the poll tax here against the slave system. He inspired Martin Luther King. And the civil rights movement is very much inspired by Gandhi. But it is when King started to take up the economic justice and economic equality issues, that's when he was assassinated. Because the part is you can talk in very sweet ways about civil liberties, but you don't touch economic justice. And the economy is, for me, it's a double violence, because the origin of the word, the meaning of the word economy, comes from oikos, our home. The Aristotelian name is oikonomia, the art of living. And when you turn the art of living into the art of money-making, which Aristotle called chrematistics, then you have to practice violence against the earth and violence against others, destroy their livelihoods, destroy their freedoms, take away their resources. So the violence is multiple. And I look into the future. I say, why are we building detention centers everywhere in India, along the border of Mexico? Because I feel that if we don't activate our sense of interconnectedness with all life, with all people, if we don't start sowing the seeds of what I have called earth democracy, we are going to see 99% people as disposable, especially with the tech working on artificial intelligence, to make sure all the mechanical work is made redundant, whether it be in radiography or law or whatever. Mechanical work will be substituted. And if that's the case, 99% people are disposable. So you can either share this beautiful planet with love and abundance and sustainability, or say, it's all mine, every bit of land, every seed, every mind, because what's being mined is our mind now. And there's a brilliant retired professor of Harvard who's done a very important book for our times. It's called Surveillance Capitalism, in which she has talked about we are the new raw material. And so in this context, we are the disposable people too. And if we don't defend the freedoms of all species and the freedoms of all human beings, we could see within 20, 30 years, a level of disposability built into the structures that humanity will not be able to respond to. So this is the time to make oneness and interconnectedness as one humanity on one planet the political project of our times.
Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions, but thank you all again for coming. And if you are interested, please feel free to join us for any of our other upcoming events for International Women's Week. We hope to celebrate and bring kinship to the school and to continue discussing this, so please join us. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shiva.